because that is true. He studied political science and Hebrew Bible at Columbia and JTS and worked at the New York City Council before jumping into the world of Jewish education. He is also passionate about the connection between social justice and Jewish tradition, helping organize the Newton Sanctuary Collaborative and participating in the work of a number of Jewish social justice organizations, including serving as a legislative assistant at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. And here in Baltimore, he's an active participant in a number of justice efforts through Tzedek Beth Am, Jews United for Justice, and the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. And we're going to hear from Rav Tyler today about what the rabbis thought about poverty on the basis of texts regarding economic justice. So thank you very much, Rav Tyler.
Good morning, Boker Tov. First of all, thank you to Melissa and Zach and to the entire Lifelong Learning Adult Education Committee for putting this series together. I think I've gotten to come to all but one, and they've been just each really special and unique, and somehow like hovering around this theme of Year of Tzedek and also being incredibly different each time. So it's just been, so I humbly offer my addition to the series. I first started thinking about these texts, I mean, maybe before, but the first time that I taught a series of texts like this was in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and offered a class called Economic Justice in COVID-19, because we noticed that things were happening to our communities and markets and labor forces and housing supplies that we had not really ever seen before. And I was curious in the ways in which Jewish text might illuminate some of the issues that would come up around that. And the truth is that now the pandemic's in a different phase, and we're also in a moment that we've really never seen before. And some things are very similar and some things are incredibly different. So I offer these texts, one, to think a little bit about this paradox in the 15th chapter of Devarim, that we're going to get into, and think a little bit about what the rabbis might think about economic justice. But the truth is, I guess pulling back the curtain, the text is always a mirror. The text is always something that we use to open up conversations about our own society and ourselves. And in any way that these texts might do that for us, we not only add to the Torah tradition, but I think that we actually are doing what was intended in this verse. So do the rabbis, understand what to do with Silicon Valley Bank? Probably not. And yet, when we come together and sit as a kahal and look at these texts, I think that it opens up some of the deepest values that we might hold in this conversation. There was an article in the New York Times Magazine last week about poverty, based on a forthcoming book that talked about the idea that in America we continue to spend more on social welfare programs, and even the parts of American history where we think welfare programs were cut, like during the Reagan presidency, more money was spent, and yet, at least according to this author, poverty has not gone down over that time. So this is not only a paradox, in this text, but it's an issue that seems to persist. I think it's probably reductive to say that there are people that maybe there are some people who don't want to solve this problem. I think there are probably people of goodwill on different sides of the political spectrum that want to solve this problem, that have different ideas, and yet we haven't seemed to really be able to make much of a dent. But maybe that's not so surprising, and that there was paradoxes around poverty and difficulty trying to figure out what should be done in a community, starting from the biblical community. So you have a very long source sheet in front of you. Usually that means we'll get to about the first page of it, and then you'll have some reading material for Shabbat. So don't be overwhelmed by that. But we're going to try to look at two questions. Maybe we'll look at one question. The first is to do a close reading of maybe a key text about poverty, and maybe a text about economic justice in the Torah, and then to look at a number of commentaries that may illuminate what does it mean that we'll see that the text both says that there should be no poor in the land, and that there will always be poor people in the land.
The link is in the chat for the people online.
Excellent. And then the second question we're going to look at, if we have time, is about some of the changing attitudes in rabbinic society around a specific category of poor people, which is people who were rich that then become poor, and how they actually imagine that you should deal with someone who lived a great life of means, and because of whatever reason they now need assistance from the community. So let me take off my watch so I know where we are. Someone told me a joke, like what does it mean when a rabbi takes off their watch and puts on the table? It's nothing. We're gonna end at 9 o'clock today. Deuteronomy is an interesting biblical text, and I think most of the Bible is pretty interesting. But Deuteronomy is a later text. Parts of it are later, and there's some questions about the dating of Devarim and this section, because we're going to hear like this conversation about economic justice. It sounds a lot more like the prophets or the wisdom literature than some of the other things that we might imagine about biblical sacrifices. So we're not going to get too deep into the dating, but I want to read this text in full. It talks about a number of things that we've talked about before in this space, about Shemitah, releasing of debts, and some other things. But central to this text is a paradox, two verses that seem to actually go directly against each other. So is there someone who might start reading in English every seventh year?
Every seventh year.
I'm sorry, Bonnie, do you mind? Thanks. So they can hear on the screen too.
Every seventh year you shall practice remission of debts. This shall be the nature of the remission. All creditors shall remit the dues that they claim from their fellow Israelites. You shall not harm their fellow Israelites who can. The remission proclaimed is of.
That is Adonai, yeah.
He may die in the farmer, but he must do them whatever is due from his hand.
So just pause for a second. So this is, we spoke about this before in synagogue, about this concept of Shemitah, which has a lot of different pieces to it. And the one, they are kind of introduced at different places throughout Torah. But in this section, we learn about this practice that anyone that has a debt within the Israelite community at this period of 7 years, all debts that are still outstanding are forgiven, and the community moves on. Bonnie, will you keep reading?
Oh,
You should give a
all right.
Adonai will bless you in the land that your God is giving you as an hereditary portion. If only you heed your God and take care to keep all this instruction that I enjoin upon you this day. For your God will bless you with promise. He will extend loans to many nations, but require none for yourself. You will dominate many nations, but they will not dominate you.
And just keep going.
If, however, there is a needy person among you, one of your kin, in any of your settlements in the land that your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kin. Rather, you must open your hand and lend whatever is sufficient to meet the need. Beware lest you harbor the base thought, the seventh year, the year of remission is approaching, so that you are mean and give nothing to your needy kin, who will cry out to God against you, and you will be rebuilt. Give readily and have no regrets when you do so, for in return, Adonai will bless you in all your efforts and in all your undertakings. So there will never cease to be beauty on your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy king of your land.
Do you want to just turn it off and leave it on the table? I'll come and get it.
Great. And what people are it'll be participatory. So if you can, if there's a mic here, you speak into it. If not, we'll try to catch you. It's a fascinating text. It both has this just core idea, which I guess we expect because we've gone through this cycle of Torah many times, that we should have some basic care for people in need, that tzedakah is a religious obligation. And yet, that's not necessarily a given that would be something, especially at least in this text, it doesn't have any requirements on why the person is in need or what the position of the giver, should you have made a certain amount of money to be a person who should be giving? And it also feels like a really real and honest text too, that has this provision that, it's all well and good when you're to give a loan on year 1 and you expect that you're going to be paid back by year 7. The text is saying, but it's not so clear that you're going to give a loan, 2 months before the Shemitah period. And it says that you can't really be affected by this cycle of time, that you have to give, that there's, I guess in today, like you would be, you would have to give that loan at a much higher interest rate or something, but they're saying it's, you're not connected to that. The obligation is just to give. Before we get into paradox, I don't know, are there any comments about seeing this text in full in biblical Giovanni?
I just was thinking that I was talking to my aunt who just turned 100 this last month. Yes, and we were talking about my grandfather's relatives. And as people were coming to this country or moving between cities, individuals would move in with other people. It's like, they were moving from here to Baltimore, so they stayed with us until they could get on their feet. And that was a common thing, a common theme as she was talking. So it's whether you're giving money outright or whether you're just providing a place for people to live and provide for your kin. This is what I was thinking about as I read it.
Yeah, there's this phrase that we're maybe going to get into a little bit later, that it says you should lend whatever is sufficient to meet their needs. And the commentators seem to say, and you'll see they look at that very expansively and say, it's not just money that I'll give away one of the punchlines. They say so expansively, it means that if someone's unmarried, you should give them a spouse. If that's what they need in that moment. So they're definitely they're imagining aid as a much wider concept than giving a squeegee worker $1 or something. Anna was next.
To me, the text looks very tribal.
Say a little bit more about what you're noticing.
Well, it's just, I lived in the Mideast. I understand these relationships, and it's not a universal. It's not a word Catholic. It's not all encompassing. It's not global. It's not the stranger in your midst that we usually hear about.
I think that's a really insightful. Actually, like a whiteboard that we can write something on. Like two points maybe to bring out is one is it says, who are you responsible for? Your kid. It's not so obvious exactly. I mean, we know that the Torah as a whole, and Deuteronomy in particular, is very interested in trying to figure out who's in and who's out. We know we're part of a community. If you accept everyone, then what are you? And if you're only so focused on, but yes, there seems to be a limiting to the people that are inside. Those are the people that we care about. And not only that, but it says, actually, if you do this, you're going to dominate the other nations. It says you're going to give them so many loans because they're going to be in trouble. You're going to be just fine. So built into this vision of economic justice is that your tribe is going to do just all right. Miriam and Sally.
I don't see it as paradoxical. I see what it's saying is a society where people have their basic needs met is a society where people can be economically productive, and therefore your society will thrive and do well on this international kind of level. And you can see, just look at Baltimore. We just invest in neighborhoods, and then we wonder why folks aren't economically productive, and so they're abandoned. So the question of who's in and who's out becomes the really most important question.
And hold on to that for a moment, because when that kind of becomes one of the answers to the paradox, if you follow these, if you follow the laws of the just economic society, then you'll have a just economic society, and if not, then not. Right? It might not be a paradox. It might be a choice. Sally.
Yeah, that's what jumped out at me is that, especially that the second paragraph, that big if, right? It's not saying there will be no needy period, right? There's a huge conditional there that I think is core to the text.
Right. Okay. Don.
I mean, I think it's fairly obvious. They're saying there will be no needy among you as long as you follow all the commandments. But since we know you're not going to get that far, then there will be needy.
Right. Maybe obvious, but also feels very different than how a lot of mitzvot are spoken about in Torah. So you have I guess we hear a lot in Deuteronomy that you have a choice, that you get to choose life or death, the blessing or the curse. But I find it a little bit strange to put it, the Torah has a law that it says will not be followed. So let's get into this paradox then, which I see pretty clearly between these verses. I should have underlined them, but we have in verse 4 that says there will be no needy in the land. And then we have at verse 11 that there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hands to the poor and needy kin in your lands. We heard, before we turn and look at some sources, we've heard one idea that maybe it's saying, if you don't follow these rules, there will be needy. And if you do, then you'll be the justified. Are there other ideas of how these might go together? Yeah, Ben, please.
I mean, I guess.
Could you grab the mic and turn it on? Thank you.
So I don't know if it's a paradox, but it's a troubling cycle that if you are commanded to give charity, and that's part of the divine law, taking away your opportunity to fulfill the divine law seems counterintuitive, yet you don't want needy people in your midst, that they are serving a purpose in some strange divine blueprint in which I can fulfill a commandment by helping somebody else.
Yeah, I think that is definitely here. We're going to talk about that on the next page, about how, what is poverty a symbol for something? What do they actually, do they see a value for poverty of themselves or for having a poor class? And it's kind of something troubling about that, if the whole system relies on a poor class. There was an article that I was reading preparing for this that actually just said any system that talks about the needy and the wealthy's obligation to the needy is based on there being a needy class. So maybe one critique of the system is based on saying it only works, the way that this author was saying is legitimizes the people in power by saying, okay, everyone's going to buy into the system. And yeah, we'll be generous, but there's always going to be a needy class. That might be like a pretty damning critique of this as a model that we would aspire for. Yeah, Bonnie.
Well, just one comment is that they're also going to be needy even when things are working really well, because you have people who are young, who can't take care of themselves yet, people who are older, people who are disabled, and there are all sorts of reasons, not just some of the things people have contributed so far.
Beautiful, but maybe despite, yes, we can put the best building safety measures possible, but that doesn't mean there isn't going to be an earthquake or a building collapse. We might be able to limit the pain, but we can't eliminate it. And that is just saying that in a way I think it's really important. Let's look at some of the commentaries I pulled from. There are a number of commentaries in here. Midrashim, medieval commentaries, and also some contemporary. They each have a little bit of a different spin, so we might read through some of them. So let's look at just this first midrash, source number 2, from a text of the Sifrei. Is there someone who might read? Yeah, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But there shall not be in your view a poor man, and elsewhere it is written, for a poor man shall not cease from the midst of the land. When you do the Lord's will, the poor will be among the Gentiles, and when you do not his will, the poor will be among you. For the Lord will bless you in the land. Scripture hereby apprises us that the blessing adheres only in the land which the Lord your God gives you to inherit, so that you inherit it.
Thank you. Yeah, so in this first midrash, first of all, it seems that poverty is a punishment. And it's not clear if they're referring to just the laws of the economic system. Maybe that might be a charitable way to read it. It might be saying holistically, if you do God's will, God's going to reward you, and that involves, not making you poor. We see some of the most problematic aspects of poverty discourse in this, that if you're poor, it's your fault. The rabbis say if you are sick, you should look, in the Talmud, they say if you're sick, you should think about some of the mitzvot that you haven't been following. So there is like a big, there's like a big strand in rabbinic theology that, you know, what you do is if you're rewarded, it's because you did good. If not, it's because you didn't. And there are other strands of rabbinic theology as well, but that seems to be one of them here. Zach, please.
There's a great textual variant in the Hebrew that the end of the paragraph says, which the Lord your God gives you to inherit, so that you inherit it. In the Hebrew, one variant text is so that you conquer it.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting connection between economic ability to be self-sufficient and autonomous and fully drive out the non-Israelites because you are lacking the poor within you and you're dumping them all on them, giving you the ability to, it's sort of like the prosperity gospel, right? You are going to ascend mala mala with your inherited or conquered land because the poor are lacking among you, and everyone else is going to deal with them. And you're going to have your perfect Eretz Israel,
right?
Lacking the poor. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Even Baltimore we know is a very segregated city. And yet I came from Boston, which felt like an even more segregated city. I was living in the middle of, Cambridge near Harvard's campus for the river. And I would say like it was much more spread out than Baltimore, where, it's very interesting to think about the risks of these communities that are so segregated. I'm going to read Ramban. It is impossible that the poor will permanently disappear. Moses mentions this because having assured them that there would be no needy if they observed all the commandments, he goes on to say, I know that not every generation forever will observe all the commandments to the point that there is no longer any need for commandments concerning the poor. For perhaps at certain times there will be needy, and therefore I am commanding you for the case in which they are present. And the text says, in your land, to refer to the entire area of habitation, for the promise that there will not be poor among you applies in the land which God is giving you as an inheritance. And then it goes on a little bit about some of the things we already spoke about. It seems to be a little bit of a second read saying, of course, in our generation, the generation that set up this most wonderful system, there will never be poverty in the land because we figured it all out. And for a number of reasons, we're already kind of, as Don said, not everyone's going to follow the system, follow all the commandments, so there will be poor. There's something about as the generations go on. It's reminding me of like texts about the kibbutz movement in Israel. That the first generation was like very idealistic, and now we're on a second and third generation of kibbutzniks, and a lot of people are like not that committed to socialism anymore for a number of reasons, or not even socialism, but just not committed to the project that their parents and their grandparents put in place. And most of the kibbutzim have gone private or just having trouble keeping kind of that shared identity. So it's saying, actually, as the further you get away from this moment of revelation, maybe a charitable way is we'll have pluralism and like, what are we going to do if people have different ideas about what this text means and what we should do? Or maybe it's saying something more sinister or cynical, saying that your kids don't care about the poor the way that you care about them, and therefore we need to have these commandments to remind them and to reinstate this system. Maybe we'll look at a third one. Will someone read this text number 4?
Can you pass the mic or? Oh. Who is going to read?
Do one more, that'd be great. And then Adina will do the next one.
There will be no destitute among you. This is the Torah's promise that the people of Israel will meticulously observe the Shemitah and Yahweh year of legislation. The reason that it is so that the poor who had felt forced to sell themselves for their daughters will automatically regain their status as free men in the next Shemitah year. And if they still owe money, that debt will have been scrapped at the end of the most recent Shemitah cycle. With the advent of the Yahweh year, they or their heirs will automatically regain their title to the ancestral heritage that might have had to sell earlier. No one will therefore be permanently destitute.
Thank you. I think this one's a little bit of the more narrow version of number 2. It's saying if you follow the laws as they are laid out, then there won't be any poor. Saying that the system works on paper, doesn't work in practice. There was actually, and one of the points in that Desmond article in the New York Times Magazine was that states put together all of these welfare programs, but they were written in laws that states could use the TANF money for programs that didn't actually help the poor. So they talked about a Pennsylvania TANF money was going to a crisis pregnancy center. Or there were a number of them around, like abstinence education was some of this money, and they're saying, a insignificant amount of the money that was actually allocated wasn't going. So maybe saying, yeah, if 100% of the money that we allocated was going to the poor, then maybe the program would be much more effective. It's like if you follow the laws, if you do it as it's supposed to be, it will work. Another part of that. We won't get to that, but there's just a lot of that article was about the ways in which, sure, we have this system that is written to work, and for a number of reasons, a number of interests make it so that the law is not followed as written.
So it seems like he's assuming that there's no generational poverty. Right? All the poor he's referring to are people that are forced to sell themselves or their daughters because they fall into destitution.
Right.
Just interesting.
I guess my understanding, my thinking about it was that they're saying that's what these Shemitah, like having a Yovel process, having where everything reverts back is trying to, at least on paper, is a response to that, that you can't pass on your wealth or your.
No one starts off destitute according to his.
Right.
I got that times 0. There's no destitution. Everybody has some portion of the land.
Right.
Which is different from what the Rambam was saying, that you're actually just referring to not just the land of Israel, but everywhere. So things will be worked out or not worked out everywhere, and he's limiting himself to, I think, the land of Israel, because everybody has their own portion at some point at times 0.
Yeah, that seems to be, a number of the texts have said this refers to just the land. They're saying we can't get everyone to follow our Shemitah practice, but yeah, that's really interesting. Esther?
Can you use the mic? Thank you.
The emphasis on Shemitah makes me think about
There. You gotta hold it close.
The fact that they keep focusing on Shemitah as this kind of safeguard against poverty, generational poverty, it reminds me of these exploitative IMF loans or global institutional loans that have entire countries involved, such as Sri Lanka. And they just, if your entire country is in debt, then even if you have a social welfare system, that has to get gutted and privatized. And then suddenly your entire country is so poor that you do have to sell your daughters into the global human trafficking market. This seems like a very kind of clear description of what actually happens when debt is such on this huge wider scale is allowed to proliferate.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's still on paper they're saying Shemitah is a release. It's no questions asked, and that any hole that you dig yourself into, it will it's not going to be permanent. And yet that's not how most of these. That's not how we don't I don't think that most loans or loan forgiveness programs and international spectrum have this. It wouldn't be a release. It has other conditions. Yeah.
From my understanding, there is no documented evidence that this Yovel ever happened, and there were too many conditions for what had to happen with the tribes and everything for it to actually occur. So it's aspirational.
Yeah. Remember an interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates a couple years ago with Ezra Klein, and he said, if they really did the things necessary to build an economically just society, they wouldn't like it very much. It was kind of a pretty cynical. I wouldn't call him the religious figure. He's there's some hope in Ta-Nehisi Coates, but he's pretty cynical. And he said, yeah, if you did all the things that would really be needed to create, said most of you would not be supportive of that program. Even the good liberals of Beth Am Synagogue would maybe not be supportive of that program. And that's, I think we should contend with that. Yeah. I want to read a little bit of this story from the Talmud. This is like a survey through a lot of texts that we could probably spend an hour on each, but it was helpful to me to see them all together. So I think this one actually talks a little bit about, a little bit around the lines of what what we were starting to get into, and Ben was talking about poverty as, necessary or value. And it actually is a story in the Talmud that puts two things at odds, which is studying Torah, which at least in this story seems to be connected to poverty because you're not working, you're just sitting in the baby Dratch, and commerce. So it actually kind of maps this paradox of being needy, so if we map the paradox of our text onto the Talmud, it's saying there's always needy in the land. Well, that's good because it means there'll always be Torah scholars in the land. And if there are no needy, that means that there will, if there are no needy, that means that everyone's in commerce, which, maybe is good for the economy, but maybe not good for the Torah. It comes to these two. We're going to just read some of this story. Again, it's a story that we could spend an hour on, but I wanted to think a little bit about how it adds to this big web of like trying to untangle this person's learning. Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan studied Torah together. As a result, they became very hard-pressed for money. They said, let us go up and go and engage in commerce, and we will fulfill with regard to ourselves the verse, although there shall be no needy among you. It's great that even the rabbis, their decision to stop studying Torah is based on Torah as a fulfillment of the command. They're saying, we know there aren't supposed to be any poor people, so I'm sure there's some people that would like, the Israeli society to say, yeah, maybe people should go, go not be in yeshiva all the time. But yeah, they're saying just be, we're so committed to Torah that we're going to stop studying Torah. They went and sat under a dilapidated wall and were eating bread, and two ministering angels arrived. I should say that this text is provided in the Talmud around a section around basically a prohibition to sit behind unstable walls. We're talking about sitting near these walls. So they're sitting near an unstable wall, and these two angels appear. The commentators explain that these are kind of like the shoulder angel, like the shoulder angel and the shoulder devil. And so you imagine in this, I wish we could in the Hallmark, if there's just like a Hallmark movie all based on Talmud stories, that would be, I would really like that. So there's a wall, they're sitting on one side, imagine the angels kind of behind the wall, but they can see through it. They're looking at these two men. Rabbi Yochanan heard one angel say to the other, let us knock down this wall down upon them and kill them as they abandon eternal life of Torah study and engage in temporal life for their own sustenance. And the other angel said to him, leave them, as there is one of them whose time of achievement stands before him. It's not his time to die quite yet. Rabbi Yochanan heard all of this, but Ilfa did not hear the angel's conversation. And Rabbi Yochanan said to Ilfa, did the master hear anything? And Ilfa said to him, no. So Rabbi Yochanan said to himself, since I heard the angels and Ilfa did not, I can learn from this that it's I whose achievement stands before me. They say, yeah, they were trying to tell me that there's something good coming for me. So I need to get away from this wall. Rabbi Yochanan said to Ilfa, I will return home and fulfill with regard to myself the contrary verse, for the poor shall never cease out of your land. Rabbi Yochanan returned to the study hall, and Ilfa did not return, but went to engage in business instead. By the time that Ilfa came back from his business travels, Rabbi Yochanan had been appointed head of the academy, and his financial situation had improved. The idea is that if you become the Rosh Yeshiva, then there's salary for him. So he goes back, and it all works out for him. Not only is he committed to the eternal life of Torah study, but also he got parsonage. So his colleague said to Ilfa, if the master, that's how they refer to people in the Talmud, they're very formal. So they say if the master, they mean if Ilfa, if you, they say, hey you, if the master had sat and studied instead of going off to business, wouldn't the master have been appointed head of the academy? It's really interesting. They're saying you're even smarter than your chavruta. If you had made the decision, you would have been in charge. And yet you decided to go overwork. And then there's this really, really interesting end to the story. Ilpha went and suspended himself from the mast of a ship, saying, if there is anyone who can ask me a question concerning a teaching of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yoshaya, and I do not resolve the problem, I will fall from the mast of the ship and be drowned. It's really interesting. I don't know if we're going to get into like there's a number of ideas. One idea is possibly that the sea represents the sea of Torah. And he's actually gone to the top of this world of commerce, at the top of the ship. He says, but I still know all the Torah. And if I don't, then I'll plunge myself back into Torah. We can talk about a number. That's not the exclusive reading of what that means. But something really interesting about this text, it seems to be that the rabbis are saying, no, it's good to be poor because you have time to study Torah. And they're actually putting this paradox and saying like that there should be Torah scholars. And yet maybe some problematics. I don't know, any reflections on this part of what this adds to this idea of this paradox? Miriam, yeah.
Somebody who provided the salary for the Torah Academy, it was probably the commerce people doing it.
They're both at a better financial level, so they can afford to worry about these issues of ego. That doesn't appear until they have something more than dry bread sitting next to a dilapidated wall.
Wait, say the first part again.
I'm rich, I'm head, right? I got income plus I got this position.
Right.
And now we have this successful guy. Like if he's down to the mast, he probably owns the ship because
right, he's the one who's become very wealthy.
Right. So they both have enough, and now they're like having identity crises. Or one isn't having an identity crisis because he's like real pleased with his position. The other was pleased with his position yesterday, perhaps, and now he's like they're like in this ego pissing contest.
It's like he wants nothing more about it than fighting each other.
So and Tana Yochanan maybe out of it is like, let's you and him fight, like when
right. I mean, they're sitting by the wall, very destitute at that moment of the story. Yes.
All this identity stuff, which the second part of the story is about, and this drama queen business, I'm gonna flash myself to the mouth. That only kicks in once you have a full stomach.
Sure. And wait, we need to talk a little bit about what their understanding of the status of the stage versus the business person. But sure, let's say that he decides to just stay in the business world. He'll still be fed. Yeah, he's going to be just fine. Sure.
On a different angle of this is the angels set this whole challenge in motion, and so there almost seems to be you can make the argument that really one needed to ascend in the yeshiva world, one needed to ascend in the business world, that they're fundamentally interdependent worlds, and that's what the angels were trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
My thinking is that it becomes a simple matter of choice.
Yeah.
Right? So it's your choice, and if you commit to what you choose, then good things will happen. It goes on the negative side of that. It goes to the lift yourself up by your own bootstraps argument, which again in a perfect world would work, but doesn't in practice.
Right, and yet they both seem to be being supported by the wider community. One is getting a salary from the yeshiva. The other one is, I guess, in a way, dependent on the fact that there are other people learning for the community so that he can go off and buy a boat or buy a yacht.
This is not, I'm saying this hypothetically, this is just a possibility that there's an assumption that there's some wisdom, even uncanny wisdom, that is attached to someone who is wealthy. And that we take the advice of those who are wealthy on a whole gamut of things that aren't the reason why they're wealthy. So if I have to listen to Bill Gates talk about education, right? That access to wealth gives you somehow knowledge and wisdom that people seek. So if it's funding Torah and it's funding yeshivas and it's funding, we'll say the Jewish community, do we then listen to those who are being funded, who are engaged in Torah and thinking about the fate of of the law and the wisdom of the law? Or can that entrepreneur, that business person dictate what that Torah looks like from the rabbis because they are in some way indebted to the generosity of this person, that they should entertain some of the Torah wisdom that comes from that person? I know that creates a real tension in terms of where we go and what we think of wisdom, because I think in terms of the story, how many poor people do we go to look for wisdom? And that's sort of the tension that I was trying to underline.
That's really helpful. Well, as someone who got a significant part of their rabbinical school tuition funded by the CEO of Victoria's Secret, that's how it works. I'm going to abstain from that. No, yeah, 100%, right. I say, yeah, this is like, right, a lot of the Jewish community is, this ties directly into the conversation we had in the fall with Lila Korn-Berman around power and philanthropy, and when you're adding this, like, you're, I think, pulling out that they're also moralizing that conversation, or potentially moralizing that conversation in the Talmud, and yeah, what do we make from that?
Like, the thing, the thing about Rabbi Yochanan is that there's only one Rosh Yeshiva, you know? Like, only one person can have that job.
Yeah.
And so if you have a whole bunch of people who are like poor and like want to make a living studying Torah, like, which one do you pick? And like, when I was in college, like I was a Pell Grant student, and like a lot of my friends were also like benefited from programs for either first generation college students or minorities or women in STEM, that kind of thing. And like, they tell you coming in like, oh yeah, take on the debt, it's fine. Like, it'll be worth it because you'll get a better job. Like, you'll be stuck, if you don't do this, you'll be stuck. But if you do take on this, like, don't worry about the debt right now, it'll be fine. But then, like I thought about going into academia, but all of those jobs are being justified away. It's not a sure thing anymore. Like academia is more and more becoming like as rapacious and hierarchical as business. And so like me and my friends are all stuck with all the debt, but without the like security of a job. So like, not all of us have like angels that are telling us that, at our shoulder that are like, yeah, just study the Torah, it'll be fine. You'll get a like highly paid like salary job in academia, or you'll succeed in business, like it'll be fine. That world that doesn't really exist.
And one thing that I really admire about Talmud is that I think the anxieties of some of these questions are read right into the text. So here we have the guy who's made it to the peak of the ship of his super yacht, and he is a little embarrassed that he's embarrassed that he thinks people don't think that he knows Torah. And we know like a lot of people, wealthy people who we don't, more wealthy, we don't talk about money because there's like an embarrassment to that. And they also, I think the fact that, right, if they both, I guess underlying here is that then if both of them had gone back to the Beit Midrash, then the other guy wouldn't have made money in the situation. So I think that to be a sharp reader of rabbinic texts, the reason why I'm still, the prosperity gospel isn't really for me. So I would, if I didn't see that the rabbis were opening up the anxiety, they have a theology, and then they actually start to pull at the threads, that feels realistic to what we do as people, a part of the Jewish community. And I think I wouldn't still be in the game if I didn't see that in the text. So I admire that they say, the story is basically saying, yeah, if you go back to yeshiva, everything will work out for you. You have the privilege. But like in so many points in the story, they're saying, wait a minute, but there's something about this system that's fishy. And the fact that the Talmud lets both of those sit next to each other, wow, this is my text. Yeah.
What does it say about Rabbi Yochanan that he assumed the angels were talking about him?
Like, that could have gone either way. If I were in his shoes, I might have said, who am I? Clearly my colleague here is the one who's supposed to be elevated.
Right.
But he doesn't. He takes the more arrogant view, and we reward that.
I also wonder, I don't know the answer to this, which makes it scary, say something you don't know what you're saying, but I don't know if it's assumed that the angels are talking about business, Torah study or business as well.
Right.
They say your time is to come. I guess
Right.
is it possible that, so he hears this this statement that doesn't really give him an answer, and he reads it the way he wants to read it. Yeah. One, two.
The way it impacts me is to bring it to the right now, what's happening in Israel. And I know very well there's this idea among people that aren't Torah scholars, oh, we need those people. We have to keep funding them.
Yeah.
And that whole concept is very, very problematic.
Yeah, I just, I think from the beginning, what is troubling about this text for me is that it's all about us, the privileged people. And if we take care of our community, and also in this tractate, right? So there's this, who's privileged to hear the voice of the angel gets the prize. And while there are really positive things about that, and obviously we don't do this as a Jewish people, there are many texts about taking care of outside of our own community, but I do think this, I don't think I read this quite so well before, to hear that this is sort of our premise, that we are really taking care of our community, let those others be poor. And again, it's not what we do, and there's many texts that contradict this, but, historically, where has this really put us? And I agree, this whole thing in Israel is very troubling, but you benefited from this system.
Yeah.
Yet, I don't know her name. Esther, sorry. It doesn't have that community, that insular kind of community to say, oh, let me relieve you of all your debts, although hopefully something will happen by Biden. But anyway, I find that really troubling, and I'm sure other people do too. But
Me as well. Yeah.
And where has that put us? And it is the anti-Semitism. Some of the anti-Semitism, I think, comes from this. On the other hand, there's also, I did a project in Russia, just quickly, many years ago, on domestic violence in Jewish communities. And at the end of it, and it was about starting in the Jewish community, but spreading to other ethnic communities. And at the end of the project, in evaluating it, what everybody said was that the best result wasn't about domestic violence, it was about the relationships with, and people seeing that the Jewish community gave to other communities. But, so I do think we have that. I don't want to belittle that.
We could have just done a one sentence text sheet. If I'm not for myself, it will be for me. If I'm only for myself, what am I? It's the question that has been raised since the Mishnah. Yeah.
Sorry, not now.
Press up.
Yes. Okay. I think in the story, I think there's a deep anxiety about Torah learning, that it might not be worth it. And the story of the guy on the mast elfa, who's really comes out of something out of a shlemiel, right? Because he doesn't get anything, right? He decides to stay back, right? And he doesn't, and we're not even sure at the end of the story, I think after the story, the Talmud goes on to something else. We're not even sure if he's going to answer the question correctly, right? It's very interesting. And he's on this mast, and also deliberately sidestepping the issue of whether this is death by his own hand or someone else's hand, right? He's falling, right? It's not clear whether he's going to himself then jump into the water, or there will be some third party that's going to push him off the mast. And so it reminds one of the story of the boy who climbs the tree, right, to shoo away the mother bird. And so the mast is like a tree, right? And the boy's climbing the tree, and he falls and dies, right? And so the question there is, this is the payment for Torah. Right, and this is the payment that Ilsa gets. When all is said and done, he gets nothing. He gets nothing. And so it's this duality between Hayeshah, between the life of this world and the world to come. And maybe the rabbis are saying at the end of the story, maybe it's just not worth it. Maybe money wins out at the end.
Let's read Shai-Hel. There's a deep tension in our chapter. The opening verses imply the presence of poverty in Israelite society. But Deuteronomy is not content merely to ameliorate the suffering of the poor. It dreams bigger, telling the people that if they obey God's will, poverty can be eliminated. There need not be no needy among you, if only you heed the Lord your God and take care to keep all the instruction which I enjoin upon you this day. This refers not just to the laws about treatment of the poor, but to Deuteronomy's social and religious vision more broadly. And yet the Torah seems skeptical that utopian possibility, the utopian possibility it holds out will never be realized in practice. So it pulls back again into a sober realism, for there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and the needy kinsmen in your midst. Although verse 11 offers what is clearly a more realistic appraisal of Israel's future, verses 4 and 5 make a claim that is at once inspiring and unsettling. Although there will but surely be poor among Israel, there need not be. The Torah's simple but radical claim is that the plight of the poor is our responsibility. A society in which there are no economic second chances, let alone one with a permanent underclass, is intolerable to God. To be sure, it can be difficult to discern just how the Torah's vision should guide us in modern times. Ideological polemics notwithstanding, there is not a one-to-one correspondence between Deuteronomy 15 and any particular contemporary social policy, but we must avoid the temptation to domesticate the Torah, to admire its dream, even as we silence its message. It is a religious imperative to build a society in which the poor are seen and treated as truly equal, and to work to ensure that entrenched poverty does not rob people of the dignity of opportunity. Well-intentioned people will no doubt disagree about how best these goals can be achieved, but we are nevertheless obligated to keep them firmly in mind. Cynicism and empty rhetoric have no place in a life of religious integrity. We're summoned to open both our hands and our hearts.
How old is it?
This text is from 2020, I believe. I know that Rabbi Shai-Hel was a Scotland resident. I think he'd spoken here a number of years ago. And wrote, this is from a collection of Divrei Torah for all of the Parshiot. It's really an interesting, he says, of course, it's about ideal and real. That, anyone who's saying, oh, well, the Torah says there aren't going to be any poor people in the land, so therefore let's just keep saying Ashrei and everything will be just fine. You say, yeah, that's a little too idealistic for me. And yet, he's saying, I think one of the things that he's saying is to follow the Torah view of economic justice, is to say the problem is so big, almost impossible, and yet the Jewish response is still to lean in and to start solving.
Yeah, the Matthew Desmond article that you quoted originally says basically what distinguishes American poverty from a lot of other countries, developed countries' poverty, is the level of exploitation.
Yeah.
Right? We all have social programs, but we permit a level of exploitation that these other countries don't permit. And that's what I feel like other parts of Torah actually address much more directly than what we've read today. Is, you do not put a stumbling block, you don't take, hold a person's coat overnight. And so that's what I feel is kind of the missing ghost in this piece is really addressing that the root of poverty is within us, and whatever systems you put into place, if you don't get to that root, you're never really gonna affect it.
The rest of the source sheet will be for next week's class, but there's a text in here about a Mishnah about someone paying his laborers, and he sends his son to go give them a meal. And he says, what am I supposed to feed them? They're just laborers. And he says, even if you fed them the banquet of King Solomon, it wouldn't be enough because they are, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it's like this really interesting text of saying, maybe a Jewish response is saying, I think that the word exploitation is saying, maybe a Jewish response is saying that the person in your midst, that there has to be like an equality of that once we siphon that person off into a poor person who can be exploited, then we've lost the thread. Any other reflections?
I mean, I can jump, like, elaborating on like what you said. Like, my family, my father's family in Sri Lanka lives in a very open. My father's family in Sri Lanka, like, is in a very rural village, which is kind of like getting more developed. It's like changed a lot, even in like a short period of time. But the thing that I noticed when I was there is that like people were poor, but they also had their kind of own means of providing sustenance. You know, like you could go out and hunt because like the land didn't belong to anyone; it was common. Like everyone kind of had a right to take what they needed from it, or you could, raise your own cattle, or you could, grow your own crops. And you weren't like your millstone and like all the implements you used, those were yours, and like nobody could take them from you. And it was like, I suppose less luxurious than what we have here, but you weren't in hock to the bank. Mm-hmm. Your employer couldn't come. You weren't in such a vulnerable and dependent position. So whereas like poor people in America like have like, indoor plumbing and whatnot, but you don't own any of it. Mm. You don't get to like opt out. You don't get to, you're always kind of in a very exploitable position. There's not that kind of freedom. And I think the really radical thing about the Torah is that there's always this focus on the autonomy of the poor, like with gleaning like you can go out and get it yourself. You don't have to depend on anyone else. If you're hungry, you go get it. And so you don't have to like beg anyone for the right to be allowed. There's nobody standing in between you and those resources. And even if that person is kind, like it still has psychological effect on you. And I think that like autonomy is also a very.
That's great. Wow. So I know that it's not, I know this is a community that doesn't necessarily like things wrapped up in tight bows because we know that life is messy. And yet, maybe one way to read this paradox is even if there will always be poor in the land, it's a religious obligation to act in the world as if we can solve this problem, that's our calling. I feel very blessed to learn and daven and pursue justice with people who make that so at Beth Am. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rav Tyler. And please tune in and join us again in 2 weeks for Rabbi Daniel Burke. So thank you very much, Rav Tyler.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.